Hi everyone, I'm Stephanie Peart and welcome to the Salt-Tea Podcast. And I'm glad you could join us for another TGI Fun Science Day. And today is truly a fun science day because in this week's episode, we're going to start synthesizing or combining our knowledge of the ocean with marine science concepts and hit the lab for a really cool experiment. Woohoo! Okay, so before we begin, I just want to say a quick hello to Canada! Anchor just notified me that we now have listeners in the Great White North. So welcome, Canada. Now, when I normally think of Canada, I usually associate it with hockey and maple syrup, but listeners, I reminded myself that Canada is so much more than just those things. Canada is wonderfully connected to our global ocean and has a lot of great marine and aquatic systems associated with her. For one thing, she's surrounded by 3 of our major ocean basins. She has the Atlantic Ocean to her east, the Pacific Ocean to her west, and the Arctic Ocean to her north. And then, of course, we can't forget that on her southern borders, she has the Great Lakes, which are so large they might as well be considered mini freshwater oceans. And she's also connected to the Hudson Bay, which is another very large body of water. And, oh yeah, we can't forget the Bay of Fundy, that infamous waterway that has a tidal range of about 40 feet. So Canada, welcome. I'm super excited to have you join us. Alright, so now to this week's episode. This week's episode is actually an experiment within an experiment. The first experiment is to see if I can actually conduct an experiment live while recording a podcast episode. And the second experiment is the actual experiment that we'll be conducting while recording this episode. Now, I was inspired to conduct this experiment while I was starting to put away some of my Thanksgiving decorations and started pulling out all of my winter and Christmas decorations. And yes, I'll admit it, I am a super nerd when it comes to the ocean because my winter decorations, as you can imagine, are marine science themed. I have a small tree that's decorated with Finding Nemo and Little Mermaid ornaments that friends have given to me in the past. And then I have my main tree that is decorated with nautical themed ornaments and seashells. But as I was pulling out everything, I noticed that my trees are kind of missing something. And then it hit me. They're missing the most beautiful thing that I know of. Sea salt crystals. And then, as if a light bulb turned on above my head, I thought, hey, I can make my own sea salt crystal ornaments, and if I start them right now, they'll be ready in time for the winter solstice, as well as all of the wonderful wintry holidays I celebrate. And listeners, if you'd like to join in the fun, I've posted the link to the instructions on the Salty Science Weekly page so that you too can grow your very own salt crystals. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is gather our supplies. We need a cooking pot, table salt, distilled water, a clean, clear glass jar, which the instructions say a jam jar is perfect. We need string, paperclip, a pencil, and a spoon for stirring. Okay, so I've assembled everything that I need right here in my own kitchen, and now it's time for the experiment. Alright, so step 1 says, measure out water and bring it to a boil. Okay, so it doesn't say exactly how much water to measure out, so I'm gonna just start with measuring out 1 cup of water, which I already have, and now I'm going to pour it into my pot. There we go, and now I am turning on my stove. Beautiful. Okay, and while we wait for the water to boil, I'll take the time to remind ourselves when conducting an experiment, whether you're in the lab or in the field or even in your own kitchen, it's always important to remember safety first. And one very important safety practice to remember is the buddy system. It's always a good practice to have a buddy help you when you're conducting your experiments. And if for some reason you do have to be in the lab or conduct an experiment by yourself, you at least want to make sure you still have a buddy who you text or call letting them know when you're going into the lab, what time you anticipate finishing and leaving, and then make sure to text or call them when you actually leave the lab. So FYI listeners, I already have my safety buddy and they know that I'm conducting this fun experiment at home and they are awaiting my call when I finish. And while we're on the subject of safety, I'll remind you that even if you're conducting an experiment at home, it's still a good idea to practice safety procedures as if you're in the laboratory, such as wearing closed-toed shoes and long pants, and make sure that you have your hair pulled back and away from your face. And of course, there is no shame in wearing safety goggles. In fact, I'm wearing my own safety goggles right now. Okay, so it does look like the water's starting to boil, which is great. That was super fast. And listeners, you'll also remember that fresh water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. So we're dealing with a really hot liquid here, so we want to be extra careful. So now the instructions say stir salt into boiling hot water until no more salt will dissolve. Okay, so I'm not exactly sure how much salt we're supposed to be pouring into our solution here, but we'll figure this out together. So the instructions just say stir in salt until crystals start to appear at the bottom of the container, and to be sure that the water stays to as close of a boil as possible. So here we go. So here's one, and pouring, and stirring, and okay, that's dissolved, and two, and that's still dissolved, and let's go 3. Okay, yep, that still is dissolving, and 4. Yes, I see salt crystals at the bottom. So we have achieved a hypersaline supersaturated solution here. Excellent. Okay, so I took about 4 tablespoons of salt, and for this first one I'm just using regular table salt that I picked up from the dollar store. And actually I do plan on repeating this experiment with 4 different types of salt. I have Himalayan pink salt, and I have the quote-unquote gourmet sea salts that I also picked up from the grocery store, and I also have a Celtic gray salt that a listener sent to me not too long ago, and I have my Insta Ocean salt mix that I use for my aquarium. Okay, so the salts, I poured in the salt. Okay, so the instructions say that the next step is to carefully pour the solution into your jar. Putting a spoon into the jar before adding the water should prevent the jar from breaking. Good to know. Okay, so being super careful here because this is hot, I am pouring my salty hypersaline solution into my glass jar container. And then the next step says to tie one end of a piece of string to a paper clip and suspend string into the jar with the other end of the string wrapped around a pencil. Okay, done. And the final step says leave your jar somewhere it will not be disturbed and wait for your crystals to grow. Wait, okay, done. Alright, I'm super excited and I can't wait to see my crystals growing. Alright, so just give me one quick moment while I quickly clean up after myself and I give my safety buddy a call and let them know that I'm finished with my experiment. Okay, and I'm back. And while I was cleaning up and calling my safety buddy, I did take the time to do some of the math, and I looked up some conversion tables, so it looks like 1 tablespoon of salt is roughly 15 grams. And I put 4 tablespoons of salt into 1 cup of water, which is about 236 milliliters. And so when I did all the math, so we were looking at about 60 grams of salt in 0.236 kilograms of water, which comes out to roughly 250 grams per kilogram. That is a super high concentration. I might have to redo my math here. But I will remind you from episode 1 and 2 that the average salinity of the ocean is only 35 grams per kilogram or per liter of seawater. So in my experiment with the 1 cup of boiling hot water and this table salt, it's definitely a hypersaline supersaturated solution, which is not the normal salinity of the ocean. Alright, so just as a way of wrapping everything up in this episode, I just want to remind ourselves that the salt on your table, or the salt that I used in this experiment, is not exactly the same as the salt found in the ocean. It's similar, but a bit different. Table salt is mainly the combination of 2 ions, sodium and chloride, and in water they dissociate and float around as charged particles. And in seawater, or the water found in the ocean, while it is made up mostly of sodium and chloride ions, it also has sulfate, magnesium, calcium, potassium, and bicarbonate ions, just to name a few. Which is also why I'm super interested to see if there's a difference between how the crystals from my table salt solution grow and form as compared to my Insta Ocean solution and my gourmet sea salt solution. And here's another fun fact. In this experiment, we also changed the salinity of the water. For instance, we started with fresh distilled water, which has a salinity of 0, which means it started with 0 salt. And then we increased the salinity with each tablespoon of salt we added, changing it from fresh to brackish to brine, and then created that super saturated hypersaline solution. And now in a couple hours, we'll start building our own salt crystals as the water starts evaporating and the crystals start forming around the string. And so finally, listeners, the last thing I'll say is that I will be posting pictures of my salt crystal formations on the Salty Science Patreon page, so you can watch and see how these crystals develop with me. And I've also posted the link of the instructions to this experiment on the Salty Science Weebly page, so make sure you check it out. And so with that, I'll end this episode and remind each and every one of us to do our thing to keep our oceans clean and to always stay salty. Thank you for listening to Salt-Tea Science. But guess what? You don't have to let the fun end here. Go to www.saltysciencepodcast.weebly.com, where I've posted some cool videos, my study notes, and some really neat experiments that you can try at home. And if you want to follow along with my own research, you can follow me on Instagram. User handle Teps Adventure. That's TEPS Adventure. All Salt-Tea Science episodes are available on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, and YouTube, plus a number of other podcasting apps. If you like the show, please rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes, as this is the best way to spread the word about this podcast. Salt-Tea Science is listener supported, so if you would like to show your support, visit our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/Salty Science, where you can either make a one-time donation of any amount or join the Salty Science crew for as little as $1 a month. So visit the Salty Science Patreon and sign up today.